Okay, welcome. Pusul. Bienvenue à tous. I'm Andrew Reed Miller, and I'm just recently a new board member of the Canadian New Music Network. And today we're gathered here for the CNMN Conversations series called Land. Now, the word land has a lot of meaning to a lot of people, and it relates to the word place. And it's sort of ironic that the place we're now gathered is a virtual place. Our voices and thoughts are on computer servers, and we don't even know where they are. But that being said, all of us here are in our own individual places, which nonetheless occupy space in land. So, just a bit about the land where I am. I live in Menegosk, which you may know as St. John, New Brunswick. And I also live right next to Wolastoq, which is a huge river for thousands of years, the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy people lived on, and they fished on, and they traveled on for thousands of years. In 1726, these three nations signed something called the Treaties of Peace and Friendship with the British Crown. The land was never surrendered in this treaty, and in fact, many of the what we call nations have titles that were recognized back then. And in addition, rules were set up for what was to be an ongoing relationship between all these nations. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, who's somebody whose work I've heard over the years. And in fact, I remember the first time I heard her work, to my knowledge, was on this relic called Two New Hours. So here's Wendelin Bartley.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And yes, that is a bit of a relic, 2 new hours. So welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to be invited to moderate this panel on the topic of land. Speaking, and so I'll just let you know and acknowledge the land that I'm living on is Takaronto, or Toronto. It's a Mohawk word that means the place in the water where the trees are standing. And this land, this whole area, has been lived on by many different peoples, including the Petun, the Huron, Wendat, the Haudenosaunees, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And it's also the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe, and to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And today, many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island live here and work here. What I'd like to do is just before we begin is just do a quick exercise. And before I introduce the panelists, we have 4 people who have come together to offer their insights around land and their work connected with land. And but before we begin, I would like to just have us all take a moment to maybe take a couple deep breaths and connect to the land that we are on, and just being aware of, our bodies in the space that we're in at the moment, and how we're supported by the earth and the layer of soil, and then going down into the rocks, the underground waters, the harder bedrock that exists below that, and then down at the center of the earth is a big, large, hot, molten, dense ball of what is mostly iron, actually. So just kind of being aware of where we are and our relationship to the earth. Just taking a breath or so to make that connection. And then coming back up from the center, up through many, many layers of rock, then the bedrock of the land that we are on, that's been formed by various different processes, the underground waters, rivers, the soils, and then back into the room that you're in. So I'd like now to introduce each person, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to go through the order of the people who present. All four of these women created videos that were compiled into one larger video, and that can be viewable on YouTube. And I believe there's a link somewhere on the CNN site where you can watch that video. And we're gonna how they created the video. So I'm going to introduce each person in the order that their video appears. And the first person to start off is Heather Peet Ham. And I'm going to just say a few words about Heather, and then if Heather has some other things that she wants to contribute about her work, that's fine. And Heather is by training a plant ecologist, and she has a passion for being a poet and a scientific illustrator and a musician. And field ecology is her preferred work. And native prairie and parkland is her preferred ecological focus. And the conservation of species at risk and respect for all our relations is her goal. In a conversation that I had briefly on email, Heather also mentioned to me that she was planning to lead a sound walk if this was going to be in a live gathering. So she's also a leader of sound walks. And I'd like to invite Heather to tell us a bit about the land that she is on, and then also speak about the essential vision of the land that she presents in her video. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. I would like to first acknowledge that I am living and working on Treaty 2 territory, unceded territories of the Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota nations. And neighboring First Nations here are the Ocean Man and the Pheasant Rum Nakota nations. And they maintain some of the best native prairie in this area, and for which I have huge respect. My connection with the land is through my work. I'm extremely lucky to be paid to be out on the land, and in that respect have access to things that others don't. And my work can sometimes be very wearing in the sense that I see a lot of devastation on the landscape, and I have a little bit of a purist, idealistic view of what it might be. But nonetheless, it becomes very wearing, and within COVID, things have become wearing. And so my approach with my video was, finding those things despite all of this. I would go out for a walk and I would be exasperated because I would be encountering some of the damage that I would see through my work. And then I had to change my view in that I have to see the good that's here and not the bad. And it's a little bit like getting past the grief, where you can suddenly then begin to appreciate what it is you have enjoyed with that person who's gone. And so my video was to look at the tatters that we have, and there's still such brilliance on the land and the relations that remain in the way that they are. So I wanted to present some of the beauty that's there amongst all of the devastation.
Thank you, Heather. And we can come back to some of these themes that are brought up by each of the four women as we go. This idea of ecological grief, in a sense, is what you're speaking to, the sense of loss of habitat, of environment, and the devastation, and yet what does remain. Okay, the next person on the video and I'll introduce you to is Tanya Kalmanovich. And Tanya is a Canadian violist, an ethnomusicologist, and an author. And her interests cover improvisation, social entrepreneurship, and social action. And her projects explore the provocative cultural geography of locations around the world. She's based in Brooklyn, and she's constantly stretching the boundaries between classical, jazz, and improvised music, and has had residencies in various places around the world, like India, Ireland, Afghanistan, Turkey, and Siberia. So I'd like to call on Tanya now to introduce her land that she is on at the moment, and more about her vision that she presents to us in the video.
I have to update my bio. That bio betrays a lot of signs of a kind of a worldview that is the subject of a lot of what I'll talk about today. But did you notice the sort of big geographic footprint, the internationalism, the the sense of like what makes an important career is a career that covers many nations and many places, and in many ways I wish to speak to the opposite of that today, but I'm talking to you right now from an apartment in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is the traditional territory of the Munsee Lenape and Canarsie people. But I am originally from Fort McMurray in Northern Alberta, Canada, which is Canadian Music Network, so it's Canada. And that is Treaty 8 territory and traditional territories of Dene, Cree, and Métis people. And I also very much consider a part of my sense of home to be a small, or what was a small town in my childhood in central Manitoba, Gilbert Plains, Manitoba, where my grandmother raised my mother and her 7 siblings on a subsistence farm, and from whom I learned an essential cultural lesson about living in reciprocity with land. And as my mother once explained it to me, the lesson she learned about land was that we learned to honor the land because there's a difference between starving and staying alive. The context of the land in the video that I presented are excerpts from recordings that I'd taken formally and informally around work that I was doing in a project called Tarzan Songbook, which is my investigation of renewing my relationship to the town that gave me my life, and renewing my relationship to music and oil, renegotiating those in the context of the climate emergency. So I suppose the essential vision of the land is one that refuses to be crowded by the devastations of extractivism, one that will not look away, and one that will not forget or will not allow those to be rewritten. But I suppose, yeah, a vision of relationship means living in relationship to things which we may rather not wish to see, but also not allowing these kinds of dystopian hellscape images, the kind of the pornography of disaster, to crowd our senses to the point where we lose sight of the essential place and resilience of nature. So it's a little capsule.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay. The third artist is Tina Pearson. And Tina is and I apologize if these bios, I did get them off your website. So if they're a bit outdated, I apologize for that. But anyway, here we are. Tina's a Canadian composer and a sound artist, a media artist, and a facilitator. Her projects involved nuanced sonic investigations of perception, presence, and place, and connections that are minimized or forgotten. Her work references biospheres, ancestries, spectral structures, and long spans of time. Usually incorporates attention states and often occurs in contexts beyond the concert hall or a gallery, including outdoors and within and through online platforms. She's also a performer as well of flute, voice, glass, accordion, objects, and electronics. So Tina, welcome, and I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself and your work and your land connection.
Thanks, Wend. I'm living now, I guess, for the last 15 years on unceded Lekwungen territory, which is on the Salish Sea. And the political name is, I live in Saanich, which is right outside of Victoria on Vancouver Island. And the land here is really quite temperate. And the activities of the First Peoples here, in terms of their survival and food, as has been explained to me, was a lot easier than in some of the harsher places in the land in Canada. There had been lots of fish. There was hunting around different. Someone's mic is on, by the way. Hunting for quite a few different creatures, and they're able to have a sustained cultural practice because of being able to build permanent, semi-permanent structures here, which is really different than where I'm from, which is Ngukuzaminikening and Couchiching lands in Treaty 3 in northwestern Ontario. It's the relationship. I've been learning a little bit about the deeper relationships of wind and water here, which is just really beautifully informed my listening, thinking about different ways to have relationship with the lands and waters here and the wind. I'm really grateful that I've been given some insight by people whose ancestors have been here for really a long time. My video, the portion of the video that I was responsible for, I guess in some ways it tells one thread of a progression in my own practice, which is, I guess, a response to just this quickening sense of how precarious our collective situation is right now. It's in my lifetime, I think the population of humans on the planet is more than doubled. That's in my lifetime. It's really overwhelming to try to understand that number. And at the same time, there's been an even larger decrease in the number of species and a much more extreme and alarming loss of wild habitat. So I think that particularly because of, I think, all of the shifts we've all been having the past 2 years with how do we do our practice? How do we relate with each other when, I think it's like what Andrew was saying about, here we are together sort of in these electric currents. I guess I've asked myself to find a way to really come to terms with what I've been doing as a human being on the planet. So where I've come from, what the practices are, what are the habits and assumptions that I've made. And I think that even though it's alarming, I think there's this desire with everyone to do something. There's a limbic system that's in tune with the earth probably, and that is wanting to somehow take action. And I think I'm asking myself to do the opposite, is to go deeper into sensation, into ways of listening, into the body, into finding a sensual, perceptual realignment of my relationship with the lands and waters and sky, and to say, what would it look like if my first responsibility was to the lands and waters and sky? So not to my career or not to my community, but directly to those. And again, it's a really hard question, and I don't have the answer to that. And so the video, I guess, is just a way of asking that question in a way that is in words. There's some text, there's excerpts from different scores, and in visuals, video from some actual attempts at practice.
Thank you, Tina. And yeah, I'm thinking too, just sort of off the cuff before we go on to our last artist, Jenny, just thinking too about these videos and how we might want to respond to each other's videos as well. But now we'll go and turn to Jenny Shine. Is it Shine or Sheen? Sheen. Okay, sorry. Shine. Okay. And Jenny works as a community engaged researcher, a communications specialist, and a sound artist. And over the last decades, she's had a variety of different activities. She's been engaged in nonprofits, consulting, observation, social justice, philanthropy, and the arts. And she's the founder and principal of Pacific Research and Communications. And she's served as the director of the Salmon Coast Field Station, which is very much a part of the focus of her video. She teaches courses and workshops in both urban and rural environments, including a podcast, Story from Here, at Hollyhock. And she teaches anthropology at the University of Victoria, and she uses art and teaching as a conduit to connect artists with scientists. So Jenny, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone. It's nice to see faces. I want to recognize that I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. That's also known as Vancouver. And I want to acknowledge the land because I want to connect everyone to where I currently am and where I was born. I was raised here, and now I'm back. I moved back home during the pandemic to be with my mom, who's aging, and I'm walking the forest that I used to walk in as a young child. So it feels really nice to be here, really good. And saying, reflecting on land acknowledgements, it's a way to thank and be grateful for the folks who have stewarded these lands and waters for tens of thousands of years, so that we can be here today and be on these territories. And it's a practice that I like to do every day in my own way, mostly through listening. But yeah, when we realize that we're not just in Vancouver or Toronto or Brooklyn or Victoria, but that we're in territory, this has the potential to create those deeper, richer connections to those places that we call home, and also with the people in the communities who live there. And for me, that's a really expansive feeling of home and belonging. So it's also about, for me, recognizing the privileges, which is not the same thing as shame. So recognizing the history and just being home, I've been reflecting on my great grandmothers and my grandmothers and great grandmothers. Also to flip the patriarchal script. So yeah, you know, what land were they born on? What land did they grow up on? What plants grew on the land? What circumstances brought my ancestors to what is now known as Canada? And what privileges were given to my family when they arrived, and how do I benefit from that history? So that all informs my work. But the work that I included in the video, it's part of a project I did with Jay White, who's a visual artist. It's called Field Guides for Listeners. And that was a project where we were connecting basically scientists and artists. And we wanted to draw attention to salmon spawning and salmon farming that takes place from the eyes and ears of most Canadians. So it, in a ways, it's a field guide to help us listen to salmon culture in its natural and the unnatural environments. But yeah, it's also a question on how to listen to scientifically land-based knowledge as well. So in negotiating that, like what is scientific knowledge and how to listen to the salmon, what are they telling us? And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. So quite a comprehensive collection of different approaches and artist visions that we have here today. And before we're going to get into more of a group conversation. But what I'd like to do just briefly too is offer something that I've been made aware of over the last year or so, couple years. And that is the legacy of the Grail legend. And that may seem like a strange thing to bring in to this conversation, but what has astonished me about this tradition, you know, is actually its connection to this exact question we're looking at. What is our relationship to the land? And so it's about the fact that the Grail, which is really a platter rather than a cup in the old stories. And I want to acknowledge that I've learned this information from Sharon Blackie, who's an author who lives at the moment in Ireland, or in Wales, sorry. And she's done a lot of research into the Grail legends and into mythic stories, which are kind of one of my passions. So, but the Grail is like a serving platter, and it's there to offer sustenance. But in some of the old stories, what happens is the contract gets broken with the people and the land. And often what this figure called the goddess of sovereignty, her job was, and there's many different versions of her, but her job was to make sure that whoever was ruling the land, or, you know, in charge of the land in a sense, that they were reputable and could be trusted to keep the contract with the land. And so, when that gets broken, then what happens is that becomes a wasteland. The land becomes a wasteland. And in some of the old stories, that never really gets restored again. And I'm not going to obviously go into all the details because it's a huge story. And but there is one little version of it. It's actually the introduction to Percival. It's called The Elucidation, and it was written anonymously in the 13th century. And this story tells the story of these maidens who always served the people who were traveling, and served them drink and food, and gave them the bounty of the land. But one particular occasion, the king of the land decided to rape the well maidens, and so they withdrew their presence from the land, and they became kind of invisible, and the land turned to a wasteland, as I said. So that's kind of a foundational story of that leads into this whole mythology around the search for the Grail. And I just wanted to mention that here because I think it's interesting that we have back in the very deep recesses, even of Western culture, European Western culture, we have this this understanding that we need to take care of our connection to the land and have this reciprocal honoring relationship, and that obviously was broken many centuries ago. And yeah, but that is still a foundation, I think, that we can claim to be, well, maybe claim's not the right word, but just that we can see that this has been with humanity and has been part of the sort of the imaginal realm and the world of the archetypes and so on. This honoring of the earth has always been there, and so just wanted to throw that in there. So before we go on to more of a conversation between all of us, the four panelists, the practice, some of you've already mentioned this, so maybe this is a bit, do you involve yourself with in order to really maintain your connection with land. And I know Jenny just recently she just mentioned the listening that she does on a daily basis. So just let's have a conversation about how we maintain that kind of contract between ourselves and the lands that we live on. And just to say one thing, sometimes my internet gets a little unstable. I don't know what's going on with my Bell service here, but if it gets really bad, just could somebody let me know and I'll take off my video. Okay. So I just, the four panelists can just like jump in and say whatever it is you'd like to say about that, and maybe we can generate some more conversation.
Well, I think for myself, a little bit like Jenny mentioned, that it's a daily thing for me to be able to go out onto the land. I live in a rural area, in a very small town, and I'm able to go out and connect with the land. And it doesn't always feel like the right connection for me because, again, it's like what I see is I live in an agricultural landscape and in an area in the Bakken oil field. So I'm surrounded by pump jacks and annihilated native grass. So I have to go out and find those tattered bits when I go out every day. So that's hugely important for me. And even just to see the light, my studio I built for COVID is just windows on every side. I just need to be seeing out there.
I might offer that I live in a built environment, an urban space that's very difficult, different from the places that I spent most of my childhood and most of my adult life in Western Canada and Alberta specifically. And growing up, I always had a mindset that that nature could kill you, right? I mean, if you go out and drive a car, because you gotta get like 3-4 hours to get to the next city, and it's cold out and you don't have adequate clothing, that you need to live with the respect for that. But that cities felt like spaces of safety for me as a kid. So I felt like if I could get into an urban space, if I was, there would be metaphorical safety, literal physical safety, which was really inverted in my dawning sense of the climate emergency, not in the sense that I had when I was 14 years old in 1984, more around, say, 2012, when Hurricane Sandy, or Superstorm Sandy rather, turned my Brooklyn neighborhood into a disaster zone overnight. There I had a sense that cities were not at all safe spaces to be in. But I think what I want to point out here is that the kinds of stories that we internalize about our relationships to built spaces, to nature, the kinds of categories that we put up, are all ways of framing our experience and our understanding. They're all reflective of worldviews and epistemologies that we often leave unexamined. So even to the extent that thinking that nature is someplace that does not live in an urban space, that plants that grow between a crack in a pavement are not plants but weeds, or not worthy of consideration. They're not, they're somehow like exempt from the category, or that like the really scrappy sparrows that hang around in, what kind of natural life do I not want to consider? Mold, that all of this is nature, and that we are nature and nature is us. So I would suppose that that's one frame I might throw on this as a practice, is trying to dismantle some of the more sort of anthropocentric, colonialist, capitalist kinds of frames of reference that shape what I see as being nature.
I want to have Heather's life, where I'm paid to be out on the land all day. So I aspire to that. I think I really appreciate what you just said, Tanya, about erasing these mind structures around land. And one of the, I guess, practice mantras I say to myself a lot is, language is the land voicing herself through us. And I think that in some ways, all of this that has been made is the earth. It is made. It's such a complex system that includes us and what we speak and what we make, which is, again, disturbing too, in a way. My land practices are, I guess they're kind of private and personal, but they inform all of my work and what I do, and it evolves. What I'm finding very interesting is the opening to ancestry, and really liked what I don't know anything really about the Grail legend, Wend, and it was interesting to hear you talk about it. I'm finding that as I explore the kind of dream central perceptual areas rather than the analytical, that there are some interesting, I don't know if you call them practices, but knowledge and practices that are coming to light from where my ancestry is from. It's Slavic and Northern Scandinavian, and I'm first generation Canadian, so it's pretty recent. So I'm finding those things to be interesting, to add to, or to, I guess, elaborate on the practices that I do. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I like how you say land practices, Tina. Mine shifted a lot during the pandemic because I couldn't go to the places that fed me. So I found myself, I felt grateful that I had those experiences somewhere in my body, that I knew how to listen in a certain way, and that way of being or listening I could bring with me over the last couple of years. I also found myself, because of so much screen time and just wanting actual real connection with real things like tactility and, surfaces and sounds that were not coming from a screen. So, going wherever I was, but going to the ocean, I just found myself like touching rocks, holding rocks, making sounds with rocks, finding the acoustic properties of stones. And it was playful. But yeah, it was just, and then I started talking with other people. They're like, I go to the beach and hold rocks too. So there's just this feeling, I think, especially over the last year of the pandemic, where, wanting something tactile to hold on to. And yeah, that's been a shift for me that I've really wanted that, really been needing that.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to just invite you, if you'd like, to talk amongst yourselves about your videos, and maybe because I know that in other situations with this series with CNMN, that the moderator has been kind of part of the project, and I haven't been part of this project at all. So, but I don't know if, but I think it might be interesting for all of us to listen to you talk about amongst yourselves about your response to the other videos, and perhaps what you experienced and what you learned about the other that you didn't know about before, or maybe that was of special, had special meaning for you, or significance for you. And for everyone who's listening, you have an opportunity after this is over, if you haven't already had a chance to see the videos, then they're up there for, I think, at least a year or so. So there's lots of, I think, until the end of the year, Terry said it, but I may be wrong about that, but at least for several months to come. And somebody just posted the chat, thank you, or posted in the chat the link to the video. Thanks.
Well, I'll say for myself that I had a really difficult time putting the video together.
Mm.
It was, first of all, very difficult to encapsulate the kind of perspective and knowledge and relationship that I wish to do in this medium, it not being my primary medium, and my finding video more generally, I have like kind of a skepticism about it, and a skepticism about the way in which socially networked media kind of extracts our attention, and the ways in which reducing or producing video to tell our story is kind of like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be as literate and smart and concise as I want to be right now, but let's just say that it feels really extractivist, and not like the way that I want to just sit down and talk to you about it. So somehow to make a video that was going to generate conversation about this didn't seem to be the way I wanted to be. I also have a problem with like appearing in video, just because of the ways in which I guess the art market, and more generally the mindset of capitalism that kind of like pervades all of our experience, looks at my body or anyone's bodies through a particular set of lenses, and the kinds of suppositions and imaginings that people make. I felt like what I tried to do in my video was to pull out moments that had resonance for me, but to try to explain what they were to people would require my scripting either a written text that would go along with it, which was going to be extremely time consuming, or trying to, so in the end, I'm most curious to know if anyone who might have actually watched it, what your experiences were of it, because I was in all those places. I guess the point of view that I tried to show with my video was that like, these are all things that I saw. These then are traces of my standing in a place. there's enormous amounts of stories and histories embedded inside each of those spaces. And I don't know, I just really struggled with it. I'm just gonna, so I'll throw it out there that I had a hard time.
Well, I think I also struggled because video is not my realm, and as I said, my actual connection with the CNNM was to lead a sound walk at the forum. So it's something that I don't normally put out there, but this kind of recording is something that I normally do, but it's normally only for myself. So when I went to come to put the video together, I felt that, oh my gosh, like there's harsh noise in some of it. And then there's a fantastic bees, just like a 20-foot high willow full of wild bees. So there's stuff that I wanted to share. And then there was stuff that I wanted to, oh, you don't really want to hear all this wind pop. And then I realized that, well, this is the land. This is how harsh it is. This butterfly is trying to hang on and get its nectar at the same time, and I can barely stand up. So I think I had to concede that, yeah, this is part of the experience of being out there. And I let my video be more of a little more natural experience than the land, even though I did still take down the wind so you could actually hear some of the things you wanted to. But yeah, it was very interesting to see myself trying to fix it and then just not fixing it.
I think Wendy asked about what we thought of each other's video also. I rewatched the video last night because it's been a while, I think, since we made those. And I think just one by one, the impressions I had, I agree with Wendy. I think you said, Wendy, it was sort of a real diversity or comprehension in how we each approached it, all the really different ways. And with Heather's, I got really sentimental and nostalgic about my time on the lands where I'm from, because I think there are some similarities with a little bit with where you're from, like some of the, and hearing the bee. I mean, I got really emotional. Yes, I was longing, to be out there, and in that, the summer and the intimacy and the smell of the grass and the bee, and I could feel, I think the rawness of your video made me really feel all of that in my body and in my nose and in my hearing, and it was just really quite delicious, actually. And at the same time, resonating a bit with what you're saying about, them being like farmlands rather than wild prairie lands in some of the scenes, and just thinking a little bit about that. But it was really, it really moved me because of it, the way that it connected with my own, it really touched my own experience and brought it so much up. And with Tanya's video, it was really similar in some ways. It prompted me to reflect on my own visits back to my homelands, because I think your video was back to your homeland, and I come from a pulp mill town, and my family was involved in horse logging, but then logging, and it brought me back to the progression from when I first started leaving land to go to Toronto to go to school, and coming back and flying over and seeing the change every year, more and more clear cut, and the image, I think it was from your plane, where you had the shot of the tar sands, and there was really it kind of overlaid on my own as well. And I think what was interesting about seeing you and your body in there was, I don't know if this is what you were feeling, but what I came with was that you looked just perplexed and what the fuck, a lot of the time was just, what is going on? How can I be here in this place? It was really quite poignant in that way. And with Jenny's video, I had seen Jenny's exhibition at Open Space. And so I loved that I knew, I knew some of the drawings and I knew what the exhibition was. And so it was good to reflect back on that. But the sound really was, I think yours had the best sound in a way. The sound really was what kind of got me in yours, and watching the little fish up close. I think I maybe avoided that in Open Space. I don't want to watch the fish, but they're right here, right up, right there, and so that was really powerful for me, seeing these little fish in their boxes, and just reflecting on all of that. So I really loved them all, and I got a lot out of each of them. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Tina. Yeah, I think it's so interesting that I think all had a challenge creating the film, and at least our group did. And because if we're coming at something through sound, the visual for me is not the entry point. And so having a film, it's flipping the entry point, is turning the entry point into something visual, and the sound can be an afterthought, where I think for all of us, sound is the medium. So for me, it was really challenging as well. And I was just really grateful that we had that conversation together, or we were all sort of having these difficulties and working through it at the same time. Which, yeah, and I'm grateful, Tanya, that you brought that up, just because of yeah, the medium is the message, and how video is sort of this expected media for us to present as sound artists as well. So I really enjoyed listening to everyone's video. I almost wanted to not watch it though. I just wanted to listen. So that's my perspective. And I was frustrated making mine because it was an exhibit that I was making very conscious decisions about what was going to be shown with which sounds, but in the exhibit it's just going all the time, and the sound is rotating, so you don't have an image that's connected with the sound, and then with the video a sound is connected with the image. So yeah, that yeah, I think for our group we had a commonality with that, which was great to explore.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Is it? Oh, go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think one of the solutions I chose in mine was to rather remove the privileged place of music and sound, and just show natural sound as it occurred in the video. So the shot that Tina was describing, which was me trying to set up a tripod and doing a shot of myself in front of a tailings pond while you hear the propane cannons that are exploding, and the point where I go, what the fuck, is like a little bit of a flinch at the sound of a cannon going off very close to me. But you also see in that I had snuck underneath a fence and into a national sort of provincial park, which is illegal and subject to a $50,000 fine. So it's a problem. But I played to play the fiddle inside the first commercial mining operation. Which I had to hike in a little bit too. There was also some footage of me playing music by request of one of my friends, and one of the people who shows up in my spoken word performance piece, Sheldon Hughes, a Cree singer-songwriter, among other legend titles that I could append to him. But and at the very end, you can see us sitting in a space that was very important to him and his mother, playing one of his songs And so there's a way in which I was like sort of in a sense like naturalizing my violin performance and naturalizing my body into the land of relationships. So social relationships and relationship to land. So all of that is kind of embedded inside there. And I suppose that one of the practices that I hope that I cultivate and that I cultivate in my colleagues and students in whatever zone I have of influence in this, because I do work in higher ed, so I teach a lot, is the idea that you can hear if you know how to listen, and not listen in an extractivist sort of way, not listen in the way that you're trying to collect a sound or collect knowledge or abstract what you believe to be the truth of a sound, that if you can learn how to listen with a plurality of epistemologies, a plurality of perspectives, that you can hear like almost everything, all the lessons you need to hear, that we might hear sounds and songs as something more than just commercial products or like, you know, behold the works of man, like, you know, these sort of like hierarchically great works, that we might be able to then avail ourselves of relationships to sound, relationships to songs in some ways that, and I'm going to borrow here a little bit from a really generalized sense of a more of an indigenous worldview, where you might hear a song as being not just an object, but a song as being a law, or a song as being a lesson, a song as a teacher, a song as an authoritative text, and that you may live in relationship to a song even when it's not being played, right? The song may well be inside you. So 2 songs that were gifted to me once by people that I don't even remember them, but they were, I was told that those songs would be inside me and they would be there and they would come back to me when I needed them. So I often think of this as a kind of a way of, I guess, a reclamation of our relationship to music, and a way of unsettling the worldviews of settler colonialism, the worldviews of extractivism, of individualism, of hierarchy, of competition, of conquest, of unsettling those things by living in a more complex, pluralistic, relationally constructed, expansive, and very specific understanding of what a song or a sound may be. One of the things that didn't show up in my video was a little audio word, sort of spoken word audio mashup thing, smushy thing. It's like my words are leaving me today. So it's a smushy thing where I layered, I was trying to record the sound of a white-throated sparrow. And in the moment, I was doing this about maybe 50 kilometers north of Fort McMurray. And I thought I had like really, you know, found like the sound of the bird. And I was pretty psyched that I was recording it. And I realized halfway through that I actually was recording the sound of my iPhone alarm that had been going since 8 a.m. And so the wonderful ecstatic like communion of nature that I was having was actually, I was recording my own phone. And so right after that, I did a little audio diary in the car, like from there. And this is part of my performance piece, but I also created an audio track of it, which is actually in the Music Works magazine and a compilation CD, but I can share it with anyone who'd like to hear it. For me, there's always like a moment of like a willingness to like, I guess, just stop and laugh at myself. A willingness to not take myself so seriously, to struggle, to fall, to make mistakes, to that all of that, these are essential survival skills too, right? And then I hear that bird, which I did actually learn how to recognize the call of the white-throated sparrow, even though I'd heard it all my life. And now I do hear that bird almost everywhere I go. I hear outside my window in Brooklyn, because the bird migrates from the north in boreal forest down to the east coast of the United States. So that's another way of living in relationship with music, with a song, right? So trying to trouble also and one fun practice that I've tried to do is to figure out how to actually credit the bird as a composer, which doesn't go so well with institutional structures of intellectual property. Sorry, that was a long comment.
Well, thanks, Tanya. I was actually you kind of led the way into the next topic that I'd like us all to reflect on, and also I'm planning to leave some time for questions from our audience, and we'll go until 5:30. Or sorry, 5:30 here in Eastern time. We'll go to the half hour. So we've got about half an hour yet to go. But the question I wanted us to think about, because I think it's something that, you know, especially if we're working in with sound as opposed to, you know, instrumental music, which doesn't require a microphone, and the tradition of music, which is kind of score related, but I think we're all sort of doing practices that have moved beyond that or outside of that way of being creative. But it's this question around how do we approach recording and documentation and or extraction, as the word has been used. Like, how do we approach taking something that belongs in outside of our own kind of, you know, human created reality into and how do we go and then work with the materials that we may feel passionate about? How do we bridge that gap between ourselves and the world of sound out there, and even if we're working with a camera, you know, the world beyond our own eyes? So I just wonder if you have any ideas and reflections on that, thoughts around how you approach it, or what you think are important values to consider, because I'm sure that many people listening as well will have that as part of their own personal practice as well, this question of recording and documentation. So I just leave, anyone can jump in. I'm not asking anybody directly.
Well, I'll jump in because it's not my normal practice isn't to record. I do sometimes, but so my normal practice is not to record. And it very much felt like for a while when I was working on this and some other sound things, because of COVID, we had to do recordings. I was annoyed. I would be listening all the time and thinking, oh, people would like that, and I would like to share that, because I do access places where lots of people don't get to see, and it would be nice to share it. But then I would get annoyed because then I've stopped listening, and I would rather just listen. And so I go out, like here, I'm so lucky that, you know, we have resident owls. I can go out in any night and listen. And occasionally a thoughts bubble appears that says, oh, you should record this. And then I try to shut that thought up and just listen. And so I find it annoyance, and it's a little bit like people taking pictures of their meals and posting on Instagram. It feels a little bit like, okay, can't we just experience this? But as a practice of trying to share these things, I think I concede to recording when I can, but I do find it an impediment to listening for sure.
I'll respond a bit to that and just kind of, I guess, address also the my colleagues also talked about the making of our videos. In my video, I was in some ways working with a score that was commissioned by New Adventures in Sound Art, which was a score for people doing field recording, and it's called Toward a Reciprocal Listening. And some of the sounds in my video are taken from me doing that score. And the score asks one to, I guess in a way, ask permission to consider just opening up to the place that is being recorded and considering the ancestries of the land, like all life forms, and really asking, is it okay to record you right now? And it's interesting doing that practice. For me, there are places that I like to go to around here, and also where I'm from, I still go back there a lot. And I'll get different sensations of response at different times, and it's I have to say, as someone who loves to, I get excited like you do, Heather. I want to record, to really be open to to that response. It's not subtle, it's sometimes, my ego part will be frustrated because then I have to actually, I've driven 2 or 3 hours, I'm out there, and I'm not getting that sense that it's okay for me to do that right now. So I don't. And when I do, it's not good. So it's interesting working with that kind of, I guess, intention. And so in the video, some of the sounds in there are from their underwater recordings of barnacles and little insects eating in a tidal pool. Some of them are. The forum that was supposed to happen in real life in Saskatchewan, my part was to be, I think, Heather, you mentioned you were going to do a sound walk, and I was going to do I guess, facilitate a biospheric art practice. And so the video was my attempt to try to create a kind of score with, and it's a big experiment. Again, my video is not my medium either. But to try to create a score that was weaving in some sounds from actual practice and some visuals of me doing the practice, and in a pacing that was hopefully slowed down, that would, I guess, suggest a kind of questioning and suggest the text, of course, is questioning, but the audio and video, it was my attempt to see if the video could be a score toward this other way of thinking about how are we on the land. So I don't know if it worked, but you can tell me.
I'm just thinking about the question of how do we record, or the relationship to recording. Yeah, I really like this idea, and Tina, thank you for talking about that, about the relationship of listening and building relationships in that reciprocal manner. I tend to be resistant to even audio recording. I like to just walk and listen in a sound walk practice. But when I do record, I try and do it through a sound walking methodology for the most part. So what am I drawn to acoustically? What is curious for me? Understanding that the recorder is now an extension of my ear, and that instead of me like capturing sound, it can be a piece of my ear is now attached to my hand, and I can move it closer to different sounds. So that's how I sort of, that's when I find the sounds are the most interesting for me, or I'm drawn to them, and I feel more connected to the soundscape. But certainly when we're talking about works of art, or especially for field guides, for listeners being in territory, talking about what is okay to record and not okay to record, when can we feel that that it is okay, and how can we be accountable to the people in the land that's teaching us? I think those are big questions. And I really resonate with what Tina was saying there. I know, Heather, you're talking about that as well. Oh, we're all talking about it.
Well, thanks. It's an ongoing conversation for sure. And I would like to give an opportunity to other people that are listening in and present with us here in this Zoom space to ask a question. And if you could just raise your hand and turn your camera on. I'm not sure. I guess, Andrew, are you facilitating this? Will you unmute the person, or how are we going to do this? We didn't really figure that out beforehand. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Ah,
I don't.
there you are.
I think I can do that. Yeah, I think I
Okay.
can unmute
So-
people.
Yeah, all right. So just if you would like to speak, maybe raise your hand and that'll show up in the participants panel below, and then we can unmute you. And if you could turn on your camera, that would be great. Oh, yes, you can also write your questions in. That's true. Thanks.
Right, in the chat.
In the chat, yes, yes. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask of all the panelists, or a specific person, or whichever?
No one has a question. I have a question for everyone.
Okay, Tanya, go.
In the spirit of your question, Wendy, about what it means to live in right relation to land, I was curious to know what anyone attending this panel or my fellow panelists see as being a signal responsibility of the musician or the musical organization in the climate emergency. How do we connect our practice to climate crisis? Or how are you living with that? And that could include suspending a sense of urgency and questioning the word emergency.
Well, I guess I can speak to that just for myself. I am not about to suspend the word emergency, for one thing, for starters. I'll put it in all caps. And from the perspective of my practice, I feel that exposure of other people to the remaining bits of native landscape, and not disregarding the fact that nature is in all of this in the agricultural landscape, and I see it everywhere, but in looking at the native landscape, if that is part of my practice, is trying to represent that for people in a way that might intrigue them into appreciating, because until we appreciate, I don't think we will care.
I've been using the medical community's terms of do no harm, and thinking a lot about how I'm living, for sure, but in terms of the professional practice, is reflecting on ways in which the practices and techniques and ideas that I may have learned may be mental constructs that have formed the destructive activities that have happened. And so even though they might not be directly contributing to, say, I think your question was the climate emergency crisis. I'm aware that the hundreds of years of thought forms that have created, the cultures and the musics and the art and the buildings that we've created are part of the problem. So I guess part of my intentions of slowing down and stretching everything out is to look at ways that I and people I work with, or what I might give my body to, might be things I should maybe withdraw from. So it's uncomfortable, and yeah, it's excruciating in some ways. And then the other part, I think I already said this, was asking myself, how can I withdraw from these activities that aren't helping and are maybe distracting, but that can be directly fostering, as knowing that I'm just a tiny little pin, but fostering a more reciprocal or less harmful or more balanced relationship with the place.
Yeah, I think that the climate crisis is part of a listening crisis, and that there needs to be a critical practice of listening for us to, we have to reconnect in a deep way through our own ears, to listen to our environment and listen inwardly into ourselves, and also be able to listen with each other. That's sort of the fundamentals of sound walking. I think that if we don't have that critical practice or ability to be able to listen to our environment on a deep level, in a deep way, we're in trouble. So that to me is part of, even though the work isn't necessarily about the climate crisis, to be able to inspire people to listen to their environments wherever they are is helping people to connect and move something forward. So to me, they're completely linked.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to the conversation too, which is partly what I'm trying to do through my practice. And that is, well, I wanted to start by telling a little anecdote that I had, an experience I had years ago with Pauline Oliveros. She was visiting Toronto, and we went out to the forest, a small group of us, and she led us through some different sonic meditations, and then which required us to make sounds with our voices. And she said something that kind of had a huge impact. Well, it's had a huge impact on me. She said the trees really need to hear our sounds. And so for me, what I'm attempting to do is to cultivate a vocal-based practice, which connects with the body and imagination. And through that internal process of connecting with the elements, somehow, well, just through the ways in which sound can emerge out of our bodies and from the deeper parts of ourselves, our imaginations, that sound is like an offering to the trees, to the waters, whatever. So, and that's something that I have done for quite a number of years with a group of women, primarily, where I live. And what I find is that when I'm connecting with a tree and offering sound to that tree and getting very close up even into the ridges of the bark and so on, I find there's some sort of a transmission of a relationship, of energy, whatever you want to call it. Something happens in that process, and I really feel that establishing that loop of communication with the elements. And it looks like I'm unstable. Am I breaking up? Am I okay? Yeah, I'll just finish by taking off my camera. So so I find that creating that kind of feedback loop, in a sense, with the environment, for me, is my way of trying to and offer to others a way of creating a different kind of connection. And that, because we've lost that ability to dialogue with our surroundings and with the environment and with the elements and the beings that live in the waters and the trees. I mean, I see it that way. I know that may sound kind of I don't know how that sounds, but anyway, I just that's for me the important link. And it involves listening, and it involves an offering back and forth. That's kind of how I approach it.
A part of my reaction to that, Wendelin, was the thought of being close enough to be in the bark and to speak.
So
Oh, I lost. And I just wanted to say that it just reminded me of the original tree hugging, because that's what it is. You're that close, and then when you hug something, you can't help but have a relationship with it, and to be that close to speak and have an audio interaction, that would be very interesting.
Mm. Sorry, I keep popping on my camera off and on. Sorry, I missed, because my thing was skipping a little bit. Could you just say your last sentence again, Heather?
I don't remember which was last, but that I just really appreciated your notion of being close enough, proximate to the bark of the tree, to actually, basically you're hugging the tree in order to interact and create your audio connection. It's very interesting.
But it'd be great to hear any
Yes.
questions or comments from the group. Like, if we have less than 5 minutes left, if there are any.
Yeah.
Carla has just left a chat message, and she's agreed that I could read it out, so it'll be part of this recording here. So Carla Harris has reported to everyone that I'm a disabled performance poet and playwright, and I feel so much of my practice requires meditative work to help me connect with the planet and heal and grieve this environmental crisis. I really appreciate. Thank you, Carla, for sharing that.
Thank you, Heather, for reading that. Are there any other comments from other members of our group here? So, oh, yeah, Tanya, go ahead. Mhm.
To offer that in the last few months I've been part of a new initiative called Scale the Soul, which is an acronym that I can't spell out in either English or French, but it is a new initiative to form a kind of a network of networks of arts and culture sector organizations in Canada to coordinate an artful and unified response in the climate emergency. And I could put in chat a link to a forum where, if you're interested to find out more, the organization is slowly coming together. But if you'd like to be involved and find out more, I can put a link in chat to where we could badly use more involvement from music and sound workers. So if it's all right, I could put a link to that in the chat. Would that be okay? So
Yeah, I think that'd be great, Tanya.
there are many, many ways to get involved from whatever position you're in. So It'll just take me one moment to put that in there. And we have monthly roundtable meetings for people who are already very active or activated in the climate emergency as arts and culture workers. And also about to launch more generally assemblies for anyone coming from any perspective. And I think in doing this work, I would say that I've been very careful to create the most expansive understanding of what it means to work as an arts and culture worker, including ways that are very much mindful of divesting from the ways in which extractivism has shaped and how the way our institutions often function to sustain extractivism. So anyway, lots more to talk about. I'm very happy to speak with anyone one-on-one as well if they'd like to do that, and I can put my email in the chat as well. I'm going to type and talk at the same time.
I just want to Conscient, and he's really dedicated this podcast series to dealing with issues between sound and climate change, climate crisis. So I think that's another good resource.
That's right. Claude is actually also part of the coordinating circle member.
Here, I'll write it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unless there's any other comment or something that somebody wants to say, I think we'll now bring this to a close. I want to thank our four panelists, Heather and Tina and Jenny and Tanya, for your wonderful contributions. And I really encourage everybody to go and watch that video and it will give a broader context to this conversation as well, if you haven't already seen it.
Yeah, I wanted to thank everybody as well and remind everybody that the next conversations in this series is on technology and innovation,
So-
March 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern.
So I guess it's time to say goodbye to everyone. And is that how we're going to close this off, Andrew? Do you want to say anything in conclusion?
No, well, just on a personal level, it was very interesting to. I watched all the videos. Forget when it was, maybe yesterday or the day before. Anyway, it was really a great experience in seeing all all the stuff about land and all over the place, and then all of a sudden everything's compressed into this little tiny screen with all these faces that created all those things. And it was, yeah, that's just a really, I guess that's what these are for. Yeah, I also just wanted to send appreciation to everybody, Wendelin, Tanya, Tina, Jenny, Heather. It was great to kind of connect, and it's great to be with all the participants and connecting. So everybody have a great rest of the day.